forward to this time together. Looking forward to any questions that come forward. And, did you want to start with any introductions about your work with Deb first, and then we'll go from there?
Yeah, so very, very good evening and welcome everyone, and particularly welcome Rohini. It's really lovely of you to join me this evening. I work with Deborah Simmons, and we're based in the UK, and normally on a Wednesday we do a show together, but she's actually on holiday this week, and we decided that having a guest on our show quite regularly would be nice, so it worked out well to do that tonight. So I'm really pleased to have you with us tonight, Rohini. So I thought we would just start, if it's okay with you, with just kind of diving straight into a little bit of an introduction to you, and I know you've got some interesting background in relationships, so if you're good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work as a coach. I'm also a licensed therapist, but really I find that most of my work is now done in an intensive format, so a coaching format or in trainings. And, I work with my husband and business partner, Angus, and we do a lot of work in the relationship realm. We've learned a lot about relationships for ourselves, and so we love sharing that with others. We also work with individuals and companies doing leadership trainings and leadership development. So, what I love about the understanding of the principles is that the same understanding just applies everywhere. But I think the place that's most enjoyable and fun and heartwarming to share this understanding is with couples, because it just has such a profound impact and makes such a difference in people's lives in an area that is just so important and can be so painful. And I know that Angus and I have experienced it as being very painful for us, and not just sort of a brief period. We've had in the past many years where it was just very difficult, and we didn't see how, we didn't see what the problem was. What we saw, excuse me, what we saw was that the problem was the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like if the other person were different, then we would feel better. And so for Angus, it might have been like if Rohini was more fun and less stern and less critical and less bossy, then, the relationship would be fine. And for me, it would be like if Angus was just more patient and he didn't lose his temper the way he does, and he was nicer to our kids, and, then I would be fine. And it really genuinely looked that way for us. And we had a period of time where we really, it was hard, and we ended up separating briefly. And during that time, I was working with Steve Chandler. He was my very first coach that I worked with, and I think he just was pulling his hair out with me basically at the time. But he said, you have to read this book, The Relationship Handbook. And so I read that book, and it did have a big impact on me. And it allowed Angus and I to get back together. It allowed us to kind of find a fresh start and a way to move forward. But what at the time the book didn't give me was a broader context, that there was a philosophical understanding or spiritual underpinning from which the book was coming from. And so I didn't see the depth of what was available at that time. So I would say that Angus and I got to a place in our relationship where we were able to kind of make it work. We just kind of were resigned to the fact that we had a conflictual relationship, and that there were just going to be times where it was really, not a lot of fun, but we were committed. And so it wasn't until probably, gosh, I think maybe 6 years later, that I ended up doing Michael Neal's Super Coach Academy. I think it was the second one that he did, and it wasn't a principles-based coaching training at that point in time. But one of the weekends, George and Linda Pransky came, and George was the person who wrote the Relationship Handbook. And when I participated in that weekend, it was the first time that I felt a real shift, in that the training was not about me having to work harder at something. It was not about me putting more effort into something. And I naturally felt better through my participation without really understanding why I felt better.
Mm.
And that was really curious to me, because it didn't make any sense. My head could not make sense of it. I was very much used to working on myself, looking at how to improve myself, thinking that new skills and tools were required, thinking that more effort was required. And in this weekend, all that really had happened is I got very relaxed. Didn't know why I got relaxed. And in my relaxation, I just felt so much better. And so I knew I wanted to learn more. And my wisdom, whatever knowing is beyond my intellect, just kept pulling me forward. And now, as I look back, what I can see is that I just fell into a deeper experience of myself. I fell into a deeper connection with, that formless that's beyond the mind that we can't understand. And I knew I wanted more of that. And so I embarked on further studies and training in the understanding of the principles that was what they were sharing, and ended up working with them doing their apprenticeship program. And I was really looking at it at that time. I was experiencing burnout at work. I was working as a therapist. I felt, and that was why I was taking the coach training, because I thought I could no longer work as a therapist. I felt that it was, I didn't know that the burnout was coming from my relationship with my own thinking. I thought it was coming from the families that I was working with, that were sort of high crisis families where I was on call 24/7, and then stepping into a leadership role in the company. So not only dealing with the families, but also dealing with being in a business that was kind of on the financial edge every month. And so I just thought, I need to do something different. And so what the training did is it certainly helped me see a new way of working with clients. It helped me to understand that really where I was going in the work with my therapy clients was to go into the content of their emotions. I was really looking at the emotional catharsis as the way forward. And even though um, there was benefit from that, I wasn't understanding where the benefit was coming from. I was thinking it was coming from going deep into the catharsis work and then having some transformation as a result of that. But what I see now is that what would happen is people would have that experience, but they were feeling better not because of that experience, but because eventually their mind would settle and clear, and they would be like, I don't want to be there anymore. And then they would kind of move forward from that. But I wasn't able to put any of the dots together until I came across this understanding. And so I think for me, the biggest piece that is so helpful is that we have to see something for ourselves first. This understanding is an experiential understanding that we need to be able to feel that shift inwardly so that it can be shared, because it's not a intellectual understanding, it's not a content-based understanding. And because it isn't that, it comes from a much deeper place inside of us that is really from our beingness. And it's from that beingness that we find ways to communicate it, and people get impacted by it. And so the first thing that happened for me was that I realized that my experience of insecurity, which was really what was causing my burnout, was that I was just so caught up in my experience of insecurity and anxiety that it was exhausting me. And I didn't know how to get ungripped from it. And not only did I not know how to get ungripped from it, I thought it meant that there was something wrong with me. I thought it meant that, I basically concluded it meant that I was unworthy, and I felt an awful amount of shame because I felt insecure. And so the first thing that I saw when I had a deeper understanding of sort of how the mind works, where our experience comes from, is I saw that insecurity is there's nothing abnormal about it, and it doesn't mean anything about me. And that, yes, I'm having insecure thoughts, and yes, I'm identifying with those insecure thoughts, but there's nothing to do. It's like there's no big deal. And seeing that was incredibly freeing and liberating for me. I had, for many, many years, looked at myself as broken and needing to be fixed, or at least um, certainly requiring improvement. And to take self-improvement off of the table, I mean, it opened up my mind to a piece that I had not known was available. And so that was really the biggest gift that I experienced initially, was seeing that all of the effort and energy that I had been putting into trying to have a different emotional experience was actually what was causing my suffering. And that all of that effort was exhausting me. So it was impacting my work, it was impacting my relationships. You know, being exhausted is going to impact every area of life. And so letting go of that struggle, letting go of that striving, in the absence of that, I fell into a deeper experience of peace and freedom. I fell into a deeper knowing that I'm okay, and that it wasn't, my okayness was not dependent on what my emotional experience was. So it wasn't like I'm okay and I feel good all the time. It was like I'm okay, and I'm okay even if I don't feel good. And that to me was even better than, I mean, obviously maybe I would have liked to feel good all the time, but the freedom to know that I'm okay no matter what my emotional experience is, that was huge. And that was something that just still kind of gives me chills to realize that that's true for myself, and that's true for every single one of you, that your okayness has nothing to do with the content of your thinking, with the content of your emotional experience, with what you do as your behavior. and and in that experience, I saw my innocence. Like Angus and I have been working with a couple recently, and one of the terms he was using a lot was the term psychological innocence. And I really saw my psychological innocence in what I had been doing to myself, and how I'd been treating myself, and how hard I had been on myself. And it wasn't anything that I held against myself. I saw that I was doing the best that I could with the understanding that I had at the time. And I also saw the greater freedom available to me. But as I saw my psychological innocence, I was also better able to see other people's psychological innocence. And I would say this is one of the, the big shifts that happened in my relationship with Angus. So I was doing all of this training. And if any of you have ever heard Angus and I share together, he's very clear and likes to emphasize how much I dragged him to various trainings over the years under ultimatum, saying if he didn't come, that our relationship would be over, and all kinds of stuff. And I have to say it's true. So he had no interest whatsoever in participating in anything that I was doing. And so he didn't know. He had no clue. So there was no change in him um, in terms of having been impacted by the understanding. And all that shifted, that really turned our relationship around, was that I had that deeper experience of my okayness that kind of lived inside of me. That doesn't mean even to this day that I still don't get rattled and caught up, but I come back to that knowing more quickly. I stay there longer. There's just a level of peace and lightness in me that wasn't there before. And in that experience, and my ability to kind of understand where everyone's experience comes from, I was able to see him differently. And so in the past, before this, when he would have been in a bad mood and not being very kind to me, I would have taken that very personally. My feelings would have got hurt. I would have felt that it was very unfair. And then I would have judged him. I would have criticized him. I would have, said something that told him how he was wrong, how he was not good enough as a husband. I would have gone down that road of basically telling him that he needed to be different in order for me to be okay. And so after I had this experience, I came home, and there was a time when he was in one of those moods, and he was not being very nice to me. And I didn't try to do anything differently. And that's, I think, really important to recognize, that we can't make any of this happen. It just happens as we see things more deeply, as our own understanding shifts. And so without any effort, an attempt on my part to be different, I simply saw the situation differently. And rather than feeling hurt by how he was behaving, rather than reacting to my feelings of hurt and blaming him and judging him, when he was behaving the way he was, I didn't feel hurt. I actually felt compassion, because I saw how caught up he was. I saw how much he was suffering in that moment. And I recognized that internal struggle. I recognized that it was nothing to do with me, and that it was everything to do with what he was identifying with inside of himself, and kind of how lost he was in that moment. And when I saw that, the natural feeling that came forward inside of me was compassion. And so for him, he was expecting me to do my normal thing. And I think on one level, he was kind of wanting me to do my normal thing. He was expecting me to get engaged. He was expecting to get into our normal argument that would kind of happen at that time. And I guess in one way, that was one of the ways that he was letting off his steam. And so when I didn't do that, um, he says, you know, he'll say, like, he kind of twitched. He's like, what's happening here? He didn't understand what was going on. And so in that like shift for him, he then sort of asked me, like, why aren't you responding? Like, what's going on here? Why aren't you come, you know, where's your comeback? And I just explained what I saw. I said, you know, I can see you're suffering, and you know, I don't, there's no point in me adding on to this. And it basically fizzled out from there, whatever that interaction was. And independent of anything happening with him, I was okay. And to me, this is what this understanding offers all of us, whether it's related to relationships or any other aspect of our life. It helps us to um, recognize more deeply who we are and what's available to us when we kind of allow ourselves to just feel who we are, so that we're going to be less likely to get caught up in all of our negative thinking, all of our limiting beliefs about ourselves. And it's really very simple, but it's not the same as cognitive psychology, where you try to flip your thoughts or you try to stop your thoughts. It's very different. It's actually seeing that you can have whatever content of thinking coming into your awareness, but there's a choice point that shows up that is oftentimes, that was invisible to me before, that I didn't recognize existed. That there's an ability to not identify, to not get into the content of my thoughts. And by resisting the content of thinking or trying to change the content of thinking, I was still identifying with those thoughts, rather than seeing those thoughts as temporary thoughts that are going to pass by. I was thinking that they were real, thinking that they meant something, thinking that I needed to do something. And so by simply recognizing that thought isn't anything I need to do anything about, and if I'm suffering from it, then more important to leave it alone. Like, absolutely leave it alone if I'm suffering from it. And so without Angus needing to be any different, what I saw was that my suffering, because I didn't have it in that moment, and it was the first time I'd ever not really had it in that moment when he was behaving that way. And because I hadn't not experienced, like, it always looked to me like, if he behaved this way, I hurt. Like, it was a one-to-one causational relationship in my mind. And so to have that experience where that one-to-one experience didn't happen, it showed me there was another variable in the mix. It showed me that I was not experiencing his behavior when I was hurting. I was experiencing my own self-judgment. I was experiencing my own insecurity and my own feelings of, my own feelings related to my thoughts. And I had not seen that before. But seeing that allowed me to recognize, like, oh, this is happening internally. This has got nothing to do with him. And it doesn't mean I'm condoning his behavior. I want to be really clear. I'm not saying, he can do whatever he wants. But it just helped me to recognize that he could not take my well-being away from me, that is not within his power. And that if I'm not experiencing it, that's an indicator for me to let me know what's going on inside of myself, and to let me know that it's an opportunity for me to settle. It's an opportunity for me to come back to myself. It's an opportunity for me to uh, practice self-care in those moments. And so that one incident was a really pivotal event in our relationship. And it kind of was a defining moment that helped highlight for myself where I had been not seeing things clearly previously. And I couldn't go back to blaming him anymore. I couldn't, it doesn't mean that I never blame him now. I'm not perfect, but I couldn't do it in the same way with the justification and the arrogance that I had previously. It was very humbling and was also very healing. And it allowed me to open my heart to him. And one of the challenges in our relationship was that because I was so judgmental and critical and feeling like he needed to be different, I kind of had one foot slightly out the door. So maybe, I was more in the relationship than I'd ever been, but I still had that door open. And depending on what day it was, there would be a toe to a foot to a leg kind of heading out that way. And that was completely invisible to me. I wouldn't, if you'd asked me, I probably wouldn't have even been aware of it. And what my connection with who I am, with that deeper part of myself, with my true nature, what that did for me is it gave me a new reference point for safety that I hadn't had in my life. It gave me a deeper experience, like I said earlier, of knowing that I'm okay. And in that okayness is absolute safety in a core level. And knowing that I'm okay no matter what. And what that allowed me to do was to be in the relationship fully in a way that I hadn't been. And being in the relationship fully, like 100%, opened up so much possibility that had not been available to me. Because that inner resource, that ability for fresh thinking to come in, for new ideas to pop up, when I wasn't 100% in, I didn't have that available to me in the way that I did when I shifted. And so by being 100% in, by having not being with Angus off the table, and it doesn't mean that, it couldn't be on the table someday. I mean, I'm not expecting it to be, but it's not like, I can't change my mind. But to be in the moment, 100% in, opened up that inner resource of seeing how to be in the relationship in a way that allowed it to thrive, and just helped shrink down all of the things that look like there were problems to a manageable size that really it's like, are they really a big deal? No, they're not. And all of that is a shift. You could say that's all related to state of mind. Like I had a shift in my state of mind. I had a shift in my level of understanding, had a shift in my level of consciousness. And so what I had been doing before was trying to fix him. I could have said I was trying to fix the relationship, but really that's another way of saying I was trying to fix him and change him. But that all that did was decrease the rapport, decrease the good feelings of goodwill in our relationship. And so when that was left alone, and I kind of basically neglected the relationship in a sense. I thought I'm just going to get on with my life. I got to, this job is really challenging. I can't even think about my relationship. I got to figure this part of my life out. By kind of neglecting it, it allowed me to have a shift in understanding that supported me showing up in the relationship as a new person inside of myself, as a different way of being within me. And that was the shift. And so in the work that we do with couples, we aren't attached to the outcome of their relationship. A lot of couples come and see us as kind of like, Angus will say we're the last chance salon. Like, if this doesn't work, the relationship is over. And so we're not attached to what their decision is at the end of the intensive or at any point in time. But what we're 100% committed to is seeing if we in any way can point them so that they have a deeper experience of who they truly are on that deeper level, so that they open up to a deeper understanding of who they are and experience on a felt level their okayness, independent of what's going on in the relationship. And we trust from there, from that new understanding inside of themselves, they'll be able to listen to their wisdom and see what makes sense in terms of the relationship and where it goes from there. So that's kind of my journey. And I don't know if you have any questions back, but I'm happy to answer any questions or thoughts or reflections from the group.
That was an amazing introduction. Thank you. There's so much in there. It's like, I don't even know where to start in a way. There's a lot in there that you shared that's such a perfect reflection of kind of where I was with relationships and what I was doing in my relationship. And I loved what you said about that safety, recognizing your safety really for the first time. And that was huge for me too. I absolutely had it set up that I wasn't safe unless my partner did A, B, C, the whole alphabet. Had a whole
Yes.
alphabet for him to do. And that, when I saw that my kind of okayness wasn't dependent on him at all, oh, that changed everything for us. It's huge. It's really huge. So yeah, that's a beautiful introduction. Thank you. I know you'd kind of shared, there was a couple of topics you maybe wanted to touch on. So I wouldn't perhaps dive into those now and then kind of open up for questions towards the end. Is that?
Sure, absolutely. So I kind of spoke to it, I think, in what I was sharing, but one of the areas is around sensitivity in relationship. That question comes up a lot. And I would have described myself as very sensitive, and I thought that was just my makeup. That's based on my nervous system that I was born with, based on the traumatic events in my past, that I thought that I was that's just how I am. And it was a real refreshing eye-opener to see that I'm not defined by that, and that I am far more resilient than I ever imagined. And I know that there's even more resilience available to me. And so I went from feeling pretty fragile as a human being, and especially fragile in relationships, and seeing that no, there's this resilience that's actually there. And the shift around that is it's exactly what you're speaking to, back in terms of recognizing, where does inner safety reside? And if we look in the world of form, there isn't safety there. Like, we can't guarantee anything. We can't guarantee our health. We can't guarantee how long we're gonna live. We can't, there's no guarantees there. But not looking there for safety is really helpful. And to see that there's a different experience of safety, that, and I've been saying, is that term of okay. So it's like, even if my body ends, there's an okayness there that's not attached to outcomes, like whatever those outcomes might be. And that's where the resilience came for me, is residing more in that experience of knowing where to look, in a sense of what direction to look in for what I was looking for. And I was, in a sense, I was looking for the wrong thing. I didn't really realize what I was looking for. I thought I was looking for certain outcomes. I thought, I was looking for my job to be less stressful. I was looking for Angus to be less stressful. I was looking for, my emotions to be less stressful. I thought I was looking for all of those outcomes. And instead, what I was really looking for was this connection with self that is just a beautiful feeling. Sydney Banks, in all of his recordings, talks about that beautiful feeling. There's just a beautiful feeling in that connection with self. And that's what I was looking for. And with that, the outcomes weren't so important to me, but they shifted. And so the ripple effect of me having that deeper connection inside of myself was profound in our relationship. So Angus said that when I was not reactive to him in the way that I had been, he felt like it was a mirror being held up to him. Now, I wasn't holding up a mirror to him, but basically he was left with his own conscience. He was left to kind of look at his own behavior without me telling him, how horrible he was. And in the face of his own conscience, he's like, oh, this isn't very good, is it? And so he naturally went on his own learning curve. And obviously, at some point he got curious enough to kind of look at, what is she learning about? I want to learn more about that. But even without that, his own conscience shifted things inside of him. It kind of just naturally had him show up differently. So that, taking things personally, if that's going on for anyone, that's an indicator to just kind of let you know that that's a sign of getting caught up in your own thinking that's limited, that's distorted, that's not for you, and that there's a deeper place to look within yourself, and that really that's what it's about. That's the value of the indicator, is not actually letting you know about the specific thing outside of you, is letting you know what's going on inside of you, so that you have that direction that you can look in, that's a shift. And from that place of okayness, if there's anything that needs to be done externally, then you'll see that much more clearly, and you'll be able to do that much more easily and effectively. So if there are changes that need to be made, then you'll know to do that, and you can trust that inside of yourself. And so um, it's really seeing where to start from, rather than trying to change things on the outside so that you can feel better. Find and look for that connection with who you are, where the well-being resides, and then you see if anything needs to change. And I have to say, it seems like 9 out of 10 times the things that need to be changed um, don't actually need to be changed when we're in a good mood. But then there are sometimes things that need to be done, and it's just so much more straightforward.
Yeah, I've noticed the same thing. There's far less for us to have to change out in the world, isn't there, when our mind is clear?
Absolutely.
The system is so kind to us, hey?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then a couple of other topics that come up in the work that we do. One is self-doubt, like, am I with the right person?
Oh, yeah.
And another one is about long-term relationships, like, how do you keep them alive? So looking at the self-doubt, I mean, it was a funny story. Um, I was sitting on the couch with my eldest daughter, who's got a boyfriend, and she was just, I was just listening, and she was just telling me how horrible this boyfriend is, and how, this and that, and just, I can't even remember it with you, but she was just, having a good old complain and moan about him. And so I was like, why are you with him? Like, what are you doing? And then she said, oh, but we have so much fun together, and I really like him, and he gets me, and he's my best friend. And Angus, while we were having this conversation, was in the kitchen. I think he might have been, I don't know what he was doing. He's doing something in the kitchen. So I hadn't realized that he had been listening in on this conversation that we were having. And so when she started to tell me, how much she loved being with him, and how he was her best friend, and all these wonderful things about him, he just kind of piped in, and he said, is it possible that you just really don't like him when you're in a low mood? When you're in a good mood, you really like him? And she just like it just hit her. She's like, oh yeah, that's true. And so that's how I kind of look at that question of, self-doubt in relationship. And usually when someone's struggling with, are they right with the right person, they're usually asking themselves that question when they're in a low mood, when they're caught up, when they're not seeing things clearly. And they'll usually say, when I ask that same question, well, why are you with them? They'll tell me how wonderful they are, and, all these great qualities they have. And so what I point to is, can you see that the variable isn't the person? The variable is your state of mind. The variable is the lens with which you're seeing them. They're the same person, and they have all of those qualities. But when we're in a low mood, when we're feeling insecure, when we're feeling caught up, when we get sort of into our negative thinking, it just magnifies all of those qualities. Whatever we look at, the negative is going to get magnified. And we tend to look at our partners when we're in a low mood. They tend to be close enough at hand and easy enough to look at. And so we tend to kind of go through the inventory when we're not clear. And so the best thing that we can do is recognize what's going on, so that we don't do that. And I really encourage people, don't look at the difficult things when you're in a low mood. That's not the time to think about what's the purpose in your life when you're feeling terrible about yourself. That's not the time to kind of go over the inventory of what kind of partner your partner is. And that, just that alone, is so reassuring, because then they learn to trust their thinking when it's clear. They learn to trust that they see things clearly, and to recognize that that's uh, something that that they can rely on, and that they know when to sort of not buy their own BS, basically, and not go down those rabbit holes. And it's crazy because really all we're trying to do is we're not stable. And so we have some idea that somehow looking at all of these things is going to stabilize us. And all it does is make us even more emotionally unstable. So it's really an act of self-care to not do that to ourselves, to really look at what is kind and gentle and supportive when we're in that low mood state. And obviously, if you're in a really clear state of mind, open-hearted, and you're like, I'm not with the right person, then you've got your answer. You know what to do. But the ambivalence is usually there because when they're in a good mood, they're really happy. It's just they buy their own sort of negative thinking and think that it's the person they're with. So that's kind of a general way of speaking to that. And if there's any more specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. And then in terms of the long-term relationships, like, I look at a lot of the early teachers that learned directly from Sydney Banks, and I look at their relationships where they've been together for 40 years, maybe longer. I can't remember how long Dickon and Kwesi have been together. Is it 50 years? Like these really long-term relationships, and they are just getting better with time and more rich and more loving. And that's what I also see with Angus and myself, that we went on we had our 25th anniversary this summer, and so we went on a cruise, and we just wanted to hang out with each other. Like we'd never done a cruise before, and I guess it's maybe a little bit more communal in the culture. You kind of get together and we're like, we just want to hang out with each other. We haven't seen much of each other. We want to see each other. And people would say, oh, are you on your honeymoon? Like, no, we're on our 25th anniversary. But to me, that's what keeps relationships alive. Not going on cruises, but it's sort of this understanding allows us to show up fresh, allows us to see our partner fresh. It has us kind of not stay in the story and the narrative of who we are, or the story or narrative of who our partner is. It actually is like recognizing that we are not fixed as human beings. Our personality, this experience of form is not fixed, it's fluid. And the more we see that, the more freedom we experience, and the more fresh we show up in the moment to see what's present in this moment. And to me, that's what keeps relationships alive, is the people in the relationship just showing up fresh in the moment and seeing what's available, and kind of seeing your partner fresh and new today. Like, who's Angus today? I don't know. And who am I today? I don't know. And I don't want to know. I want that to be a discovery and to be curious. And so to me, that's what really allows the the loving and the rapport and the goodwill to just be infused with energy and aliveness. And really what um, what I see as the truth is that our essence is love. Like that formless essence is an impersonal love that we can't really put into words, but we can feel it and we can recognize it. And so ultimately, if our essence is love, then relationships are pretty easy if we just come back to that essence, because all there's going to be is love. And when there isn't that experience, it's just a reminder of how we as human beings can get caught up and can suffer as a result of that. But to me, that's the normal learning curve that we're all on. It's not a problem. It's not something to be fixed. It's kind of, I see it's what we're here to do. We're here to see what gets in the way of that impersonal love, that what gets in the way of us feeling that more deeply. And rather that being a problem, we just get to see that, oh, this is an opportunity to wake up even more fully to what is true.
Yeah, I love that. The knowing that our true nature is love is just, oh, that changed everything for me. It just, I like kind of what you were saying there about being fresh every day with Angus. That's, yeah. And that impersonal love, that's what that is, isn't it? It's a freshness in every moment, even. Yeah.
Yeah. And that impersonal love is like, it's there, even if you know, it's like, I could be mad at him, but I
Yeah.
know,
Oh,
like, that's the foundation. That's something that is just so, present, much more present now than it ever was.
yeah. Beautiful. We had a question that came in, somebody that couldn't join the webinar tonight. So I wondered if we could
Hmm.
perhaps answer that question first and then open up and see if there's anyone with questions.
Sure.
Is that okay? I've got the question written on my other screen, so I'll read that out for you because
Okay, go ahead.
a well-written question. So my question is around personal boundaries. If I understand and accept that when my partner gets in a temporary low mood, he acts accordingly, but if I find his behavior in that moment scary, how do I set a boundary and take care of myself? Do I just have to accept all of his low mood behavior as his humanness?
Hmm. Well, I'm just thinking about where to start in the question. So I think that it's really helpful to see that everybody is doing the best that they can in each moment, um, with how they're seeing things, with the understanding that they have. I think that's just true for myself. It's true for everybody. We're all doing the best that we can. So that's the psychological innocence. And, I just think that's true. I don't think that we can escape that we can only do the best that we can based on what we see. Now, does that mean we condone everyone's behavior? No, I don't condone um, the behavior, but I do want to see the psychological innocence. And in terms of boundaries, it's really about us taking care of ourselves. That's how I see boundaries. So I'm going to give another example with one of our children in terms of this, because I think it illustrates it well. So, we have two girls, 19 and 17. So they can, one of them in particular can get pretty hot-headed and discharge her hot-headedness on us, and she was having one of those moments where she was just really angry. And the we have a fob that you use to get into the gym for our community association, and it had got lost, like, I don't know, a long time ago, and Angus and I had never got around to replacing this fob because we don't actually use the gym that much. We like to go hiking, but she um, wanted to go to the gym. The fob hasn't been replaced. It fell off our list of to-dos, and she was furious, and she was obviously in a low mood, and she was just went through the list of how incompetent we are, how our personal lives are a mess, and how we will focus on work, but we're not going to take care of things, like, just going right in there. Now, fortunately, at this moment, I had a lot of bandwidth. I wasn't taking what she was saying personally. I could just see that she was upset. I recognized, yeah, we haven't replaced the fob, but I didn't react to what she was saying. So I didn't really need to have any self-care at that time. I didn't need to set a boundary with her because I wasn't taking it personally. I was basically okay with her just dumping it all on me. Not that I is my preference, but it really wasn't bothering me. And I knew that the storm would blow over. Now, that situation would have been very different if I didn't have that level of bandwidth for me in that moment. So if I had been more destabilized inside of myself, I would have needed to set a boundary for me. So I can't really do anything about her. I can't, say, stop that, don't do that anymore. I mean, I could, but it's probably not going to do anything. But if I would need to set a boundary in that situation, I would need to remove myself from that situation. That would be my boundary. It's like, I can't listen to this right now. I'm not in a good enough frame of mind. I'm going to get reactive. I don't want to get reactive with you, but if I stick around here, I know I'm going to go there. And she would want to probably just keep going at it. She'd want me to stay there to kind of receive her vitriol, but I've got to take responsibility for myself. And so and it's happened in the past where I've just had to remove myself for the situation. And that was my boundary. So I think boundaries are about self-care, and they're about recognizing we can't control another person's behavior, but we can take care of ourselves. And in the sense for so I saw a comment. I'm not going to read the comment
Okay.
right now. I got distracted for a second. But in the sense of, do we just need to put up with anyone else's behavior? We don't need to. We need to make self-honoring choices for ourselves, but we can do that with much more clarity when we see the other person's psychological innocence, and then plan accordingly, basically, and make whatever decisions are really self-honoring from that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things that I've seen time and again is that our innate wisdom just comes for us in the moments when we need it. If there's, like you say, if you needed to leave the room in those moments, something in us knows that, like, no matter how much kind of thinking we've got in our minds somewhere, we've got that little voice of wisdom that's kind of going, hey, leave the room.
Absolutely.
Hey,
Absolutely.
go outside
Yeah.
from there, whatever it might
Yeah.
be. That
Yeah.
wisdom comes through. And I've really seen that the more I listen for that in those moments, the more available it is for me. And
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have had a question on the chat. I'll read that out. So
thank you. That'd be helpful. Yeah.
it says, my daughter can't be here, has to be at work, but she's been reading the relationship handbook and thinks her boyfriend, the father of her child, may think that she's trying to manipulate him when she doesn't react or show compassion and understanding. He's not open to hearing about this way of being in relationships at the moment. Do you have any counsel for her? That makes sense. You're kind of
yeah. And if the person they're on the call, if they want to clarify anything based on my response, please speak up. But it's like that's a reflection of his insecure thinking, paranoia, whatever you want to call that. That's a reflection of his own insecurity, and you can't really do anything about what someone else is buying into. You can only look at taking care of yourself in the moment and do what feels right in the moment. So if your daughter, I'm hoping your daughter, through the way that she's showing up in the relationship, is actually feeling more peace of mind. Like, that's ultimately what's important, that she's feeling more peace of mind, not getting reactive, and it's got nothing to do with the manipulation of him. And he's either going to be able to sort of start to see that that's authentic, and start to see that that's not a manipulation over time. I can see that, with Angus, when I made that shift, he was able to feel the genuine compassion, because in the past he would have thought, oh, this is just some other technique that Rohini's using on me to try and get me to behave a certain way. But he felt the genuineness. And so my hope would be that shift is authentic in your daughter, and that at some point that genuineness will be sustainable, it will be felt, and the compassion will come through. And depending on how caught up he is in his own insecurity, there's no real way to know how long that's going to take or what that's going to look like. And if Judy, if you have any further comments, please feel free to pipe in.
Yeah, thank you. So I think what I'll do now is just, if anybody has got any other questions. Oh, Judy's just put thank you, so I think that's helped.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Judy. If anyone has got any questions, I'm just going to check my view. If you want to kind of wave at the screen, or I think there is a way to officially raise your hand on Zoom. So if you want,
if they click the participants button and
yeah,
then the raise hand button, then you'll be able to see who's raised their hand.
Yep. And if anyone's got any questions, then I'm happy to unmute you and bring you in, or like Judy, you can type your question in. And if not, gosh, we'll have to think of more things we can talk about.
Well, I think there is I see another question in the chat. Do you see that one?
Oh, that hasn't come up. Has that gone to?
Let me see. I can read it.
There it is. Yeah, I can see it.
it.
Yep. So it says, when my partner or other people are in a reaction, I default to the feeling that I am flawed and it's all my fault. There must be something wrong with me if they are reacting like that. How best can I work with this, especially as my thinking tells me he might have an investment in me believing I'm flawed?
Wow. Well, and I'd love, this is Alfie, so I'd love if to, if you want to have a conversation about this, I'd be happy to speak with you. I don't know if I can see you on the screen. Can't see you right now. But anyway, so what I find really helpful is you're saying that you have sort of default thinking that comes up and that you buy into it. Well, the opportunity is to really genuinely for yourself recognize that it's the thinking that's flawed. It's not you that's flawed. There's nothing wrong with you, but the thinking is distorted. It's off base, and that when we see that, it's much easier to not identify with it, to not buy into it, to not continue to fuel it. So I would say, first and foremost, the feeling quality behind our thinking lets us know how flawed it is. So if you're feeling like you're flawed, if you're having thinking I'm flawed, the feeling behind that is going to be negative. It's not going to be a positive feeling. And so you use the feeling as your compass to let you know when you can trust your thinking and when you can't. And this is something that is very experiential. It's not intellectual, because your thinking will give you all the logic as to why you're the one that's flawed, and it will look very reasonable, and there'll be all kinds of evidence that your thinking will bring up to prove the point. So you can't trust any of that when there's that negative feeling behind it. And that's really what the signal is to see that our thinking cannot be trusted when it's got that feeling behind it. And the more that we see that across the board, the less likely we are to identify with it, and the more likely we are to look to the feeling that we can trust, like you were saying, Beck, the feeling of wisdom, the feeling of knowing that you're okay. Like, that's what you can trust. And when you look in that direction, different quality of thought comes forward, fresh ideas that aren't that default habitual conditioned thinking pop into your awareness. And there's a deeper knowing that is available to you, but it does require some space to be listened to. So the opportunity is for you to really respect the feeling of wisdom, the deeper knowing of who you are, and the thoughts related to that, and to see when you don't need to respect your thinking, and in fact you can just ignore it and leave it alone. And when we do that, it just fizzles out. It can't stick around. Thought is designed to flow, and the only way it gets to stick around is if we're putting energy into it. And so if you check this out for yourself and really see what's reliable within you, what you can trust. Like, an example is this: if you have somebody telling you a whole bunch of lies and saying, if you give me $100,000, you're going to get this, this, and this, and they're lying to you, you're not going to do anything with it. You're going to say, no, thank you. Well, when we have that same kind of clarity with the thoughts in our own mind, it's the same thing. We just say, no, thank you, not interested. And you just leave it alone. So Alfie, let me know if that's helpful.
Hi.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, so that is really helpful. Yeah, just the practicing of any interaction, if there's a feeling that's uncomfortable in me, that all that is telling me is something about my own thinking is wrong, and just to find any way to move to a better place until, yeah.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even say it's wrong. It just can't be trusted. It's not even that you shouldn't be having those thoughts. You just can't trust those thoughts.
Yeah.
And that there's a deeper knowing available to you that you can listen, that is available to you. And it's simply about recognizing, oh, you can look in that direction instead, and it will feel different. And only you can know what that reference point of feeling is for you. But to get that familiarity with that reference point of a nice feeling, of a warm feeling, of a loving feeling, of a kind feeling, and to look in that direction, even when there's a whole bunch of noise going on with that habitual thinking. But it's there, it's available.
Yeah. And then maybe with time, wisdom from that place comes in that would say this is a good relationship, or this is a relationship to stay in or not stay in.
Yeah, you'll know more listening to that inside of you, much more than the noise of your habitual thoughts.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm grateful. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for sharing. Great to hear from you.
Thanks, Alfie. So Nelly has got a hand up. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correct. Apologise if I haven't. Is your question still relevant? Do you want me to unmute you and or I'll unmute, and if your question is still relevant, feel free to dive in.
Okay, it was Anneli.
Anneli, hi.
Yeah, I've been listening to you for a long time now, Rohini. And finally, I have a question. Well, I'm just going to tell you about my life and what I have come to know about myself from listening to you. Well, I have been alone for very long times, and that is not a problem for me. I never feel alone when I'm living on my own, but when I get involved in a relationship, I do have trouble. I feel lonely. And I kind of expect a lot. At present time, I am working full time. I'm studying full time, so I actually don't have time to meet my boyfriend every day. And he's okay with meeting with me like twice a week. But that is a problem for me in my mind, in my head. He's nice and we are having a nice relationship, but I kind of want more even though I don't need more.
It sounds like you miss him.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like you just you want to see more of him and that you miss him, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean, given what's going on in your life, that you have to see him more, but just getting comfortable with that it's okay to miss someone and to want to be with them even if you can't be with them. And getting okay with that might allow you to have fresh thinking that lets you see possibilities. So rather than it being that you know, you feel lonely in the relationship, I hear it says you just want to see him more, and maybe life is making that a little bit more challenging on the logistical level, but who knows what might occur to you if you kind of just allow that to be okay and allow yourself to be open to the love that's really behind the missing.
Yeah, thank you. I really needed to hear that.
Yeah, and that's lovely that you're in a relationship and enjoying it.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for sharing. Great to connect with you.
Yeah, thanks, Anneli. So I think we're nearly at the end of our hour together, which has just sped by unbelievably so quickly. I think we've managed to get through all the questions that popped up, so that's good news. Thank you so much for being with me today, Rohini. It's been a really, really lovely webinar, and I hope everybody else has enjoyed it too. I thought we'd just finish, if it's all right with you, with anything that, if you've got anything else kind of coming up that you want people to know about, or how they can connect with you offline if they want to do that.
The best way for people to connect with me is through my website, rohiniross.com, and I send out a weekly blog post and you know, usually video blog with Angus once a week. So if you'd like to get that, you can sign up on my website to get that weekly. And we just launched our Soul Centered series, so there aren't any upcoming events on the books at this point in time, other than, you know, some free webinars coming up. So, but if you want to stay connected, then, you know, my newsletter always has the upcoming events in there.
Perfect. Yeah. And actually, same for us. We have a website, daretobeYou.co.uk, and you can sign up for our newsletter, and we put our events. Oh,
I just remembered, there is also, I do have a free ebook on my website.
Nice.
Relationships. You know what? I don't know how the link works. Oh, God. Actually, that's in my newsletter too. So if you want to get the free ebook, there's a link for that in my newsletter, and I don't think it's been put properly on my website yet. So it's something I'm working on. So yeah.
If you get hold of a link for that, I can always pop it underneath the recording of this webinar.
I'll send you the link so you can add it there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I am back next week with Deb. Deb's back hopefully next week from her holiday, and we'll be doing our YouTube show at 10:30 next Wednesday, UK time. So if anybody wants to join us there, you can have a look at our YouTube channel. Is Dare to Be You. So if you want to catch up with, and I'm sure at some point we'll have some other wonderful guests as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And it's been really lovely to virtually chat with you and hang out.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. Great seeing all of you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.